All right, if you haven't done so, I invite you to open your Bibles to the book of Revelation. And today we're going to be in chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. Only a couple of weeks left in class before we come to our summer break. Now, we'll still be having Bible class, of course, over the summer, but we're going to be taking a break from the book of Revelation. I believe Jay has arranged for us to have a different teacher each week over the summer. Some will have one or two classes, I think, and each class will be its own standalone thing, and we do that because we know people are kind of in and out during the summer. And so sometimes it's hard to do something where you're trying to build continuity. So in the three class sessions that we have left this week and the next and the week after, my goal is to get us through the end of Revelation chapter 14. And if I can accomplish that goal, that will get us ready to come back in September and start in chapter 15, and that will begin with the final bowls of God's wrath. And that will count us down to what is traditionally known as the Battle of Armageddon, and then, of course, the glorious return of our Lord Jesus Christ. I'm greatly looking forward to speaking to you, especially about those things of the return of the Lord and what is to come. And Lord willing, that will be the subject that we will take up this fall. This morning, we are coming into chapter 13, and it's going to be a good follow-up to the subject that we were looking at last Sunday morning. If you recall, what we studied last Sunday morning was chapter 12, and the subject of chapter 12 primarily was that of the dragon. And the dragon, of course, is representative of Satan, but not Satan alone, because the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns upon its heads. And I suggested to you that these heads stand for the great anti-world or anti-God empires of the world. There was Egypt, there was Assyria, there was Babylon, there was Persia, there was Greece, there was Rome. All of those are in the past, but there is one more yet to come, and that will be the empire of the beast that we're going to learn about here in chapter 13, or the one who's often known as the Antichrist. Now, we saw in chapter 12 that the dragon made war on several fronts, and this kind of covers all of salvation history in that one chapter. He made war against the woman, and the woman is representative of Israel. He tried to make war against the woman's child, and the child, of course, is the Messiah, but the Messiah was snatched up to heaven beside the throne of the Father. And so, because that couldn't happen, that's all in the past, in the future there is going to be a battle between Satan and his angels and Michael and his angels. And at some point yet in the future, in this final 7-year period that we are talking about, Satan and his angels are going to be cast down to the earth, and they are no longer going to have any access to heaven. They will no longer be able to accuse God's people before the throne as they have been doing for centuries and centuries. But he will not be inactive, even though he's thrown to the earth. He is going to make good use of his time on the earth because he knows his time is now short. And so he is going to stir up persecution against God's people, both Israel, the woman, and her children, which is the church. And that will lead to a time of chaos unlike anything that has ever been known up until that time. What we're going to discover today as we continue our study into chapter 13 is exactly what it looks like when Satan has been cast to the earth. He will certainly not be inactive, nor will he be acting directly in most cases. But he is going to act through a human representative. And that representative is the one that is known commonly as the beast. Okay? Now, we have already talked about the beast in this class. Sometimes he's referred to as the beast. In other parts of Scripture, the letters of John, he's known as the Antichrist. Sometimes he's referred as the man of lawlessness. That's the way Paul refers to him. And Daniel likes to call him the man of intrigue or the master of intrigue. Whatever name you want to use for him, it all represents this one reality. It is a man who will come to have worldwide fame, worldwide power in the final days of this age, and he will bring more destruction to God's people than any ruler in the history of humankind, okay? But his work, thankfully, will be cut short by the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, and so we can be thankful that while he is successful for a while, he will not be able to do all that he intends to do. So it's going to take us 2 weeks to move through chapter 13 here, especially since our time is going to be shortened today. I don't know who had a long sermon today. I don't know what. I don't know how that happens, but yeah. Yeah, we had 3 sermons today, didn't we? Yeah. But today we're primarily going to look at chapter 13, verses 1 through 10, which speaks of the beast himself. Okay. Next week we're going to look at verses 11 through 18, which is going to introduce us to a third character in this evil plot, and that will be the false prophet. And I and others have often called this the unholy trinity. Okay, the beast, the Satan, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. But we'll have a little bit more to say about that next week when we get into that. Today, I want to focus exclusively on the beast. And so, with that in mind, let's pause and read this particular scripture together, and then we'll work our way through it. I'm going to begin reading chapter 13 and verse 1. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea, and it had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head was a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but it had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and his great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed, and the whole world was filled with wonder, and they followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast himself and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. And it was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all, that is, whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. All right, I know that several of you have been waiting patiently until we get to this particular subject. It's one of the more well-known subjects of the book of Revelation, but one in which there is a lot of mystery and a lot of speculation. Now, I'm going to try to stay away from as much speculation as I can and just examine what the text brings before us. And I want to look at verses 1 through 10 here this morning under 3 different headings. I want to talk about the appearance of the beast. Then I want to look at the authority of the beast. And then finally, if we have time here this morning, we'll end class by looking at the adoration of the beast. That's a nice alliteration there, isn't it? The appearance, the authority, and the adoration of the beast. So let's begin first with his appearance. His appearance is in verse 1, and as you might imagine, it's a very intriguing scene. And the first thing that I want to call your attention to is that it is the dragon who summons the beast. And the place from which he summons him is the sea. Now, there is a textual variation here that I noticed as I was comparing different translations as I was preparing this week. If you happen to have a King James Bible with you this morning, or even the New King James translation, it will say that John was the one that was standing on the seashore whenever this beast rises up out of the sea. And so it's as if John has been transported in this vision, and he's standing there on the beach, and he feels the wind in his hair, and he feels the sand in between his toes, and as he's there, suddenly there's this gnarly looking thing that comes rising up out of the sea. So all of the later translations have changed this, and the reason why they have done that is because they have now found older and more reliable manuscripts since the King James Bible was translated, which all agree upon the fact that it is the dragon who is standing there on the beach, not John. And that doesn't really matter all that much, except to say it is important to see who is the animating force behind the beast. This is not something that just happens on its own. This is something that is being called into reality by the dragon who has now been cast to the earth. Now, it is worth noting the fact that the beast is coming out of the sea. Sometimes in biblical literature, the sea is basically the place of evil and chaos. It's kind of symbolic of the abyss, which has already been mentioned several times here in the book of Revelation. I'll show you a specific passage here on the screen from Isaiah chapter 27 and verse 1. In that day, what day? The day of the Lord. Okay. In that day the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great, and powerful sword, Leviathan, the gliding serpent. Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the what? The sea. Okay. So this is a passage about Satan and God's future punishment of Satan. It comes in a section of the book of Isaiah that is often known as the little apocalypse that goes from chapter 24 to chapter 27 of Isaiah. And as God prepares to render judgment on Satan here in this passage, Satan is portrayed as the Leviathan, which is a great sea monster. And you can see here kind of the consistency of images that is used for Satan. Sometimes he's called the serpent, sometimes he's called the dragon. Here he is likened to the great sea beast, the Leviathan, and which we assume would still be serpent-like or dragon-like. But the text says God will slay the monster of the sea. So here in Revelation chapter 13 is this dragon who's standing on the shore of the sea. It's as if he himself has come up out of the sea, which I think we're meant to envision. And as he comes up out of the sea, he is summoning the beast to come and join him. Now, the beast is not described in his literal appearance. It is not said whether he, too, is a dragon-like creature, but I really think it doesn't matter. The beast is not a literal beast, of course. You understand that's just a metaphor. It's a literary figure. The imagery is taken from the book of Daniel, where the great anti-God empires of the world are represented as beasts in one of Daniel's dreams. And you'll notice at the end of verse 1 here that the dragon, he has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And we've already talked about what those 7 heads are. Okay? It represents all of those anti-God empires from the past and the one that is still yet to come, the one of the beast. Okay? Now, this is furthered by what is said in verse 2. The beast is said to resemble a leopard, but have feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. Okay, why does he say it like this? Well, it's more than the fact that he simply wants to try to give you a visual representation in your mind. Indeed, you may find it hard to have a visual representation of your mind of any kind of creature that would be like a leopard and a bear and a lion all in one thing. But I want you to hold your place here in Revelation chapter 13 for a moment. I'd like for you to join me in Daniel chapter 7. We're going to be moving in and out of Daniel several times here in class today because it informs almost everything that is said here about the beast in this great chapter. Here in Daniel chapter 7, you have Daniel's dream about the four coming empires. It's very similar to Nebuchadnezzar's dream that happened back in Daniel chapter 2, where he saw four great empires arising. But in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he saw them in terms of a statue. You all remember that particular vision? And so there was the head of gold, there was the chest and arms of silver, there was the midsection of bronze, and then there's the legs of iron and the feet that are a mixture of iron and clay. Well, in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel is going to have a dream now, and he's going to see four beasts. And the four beasts represent the same things that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream of the statue. First, there is Babylon. Then there is Medo-Persia. Then there is Greece. And then finally there is the empire which is to come, which is partially fulfilled in Rome, but then partially fulfilled in the end-time empire. But as we look at Daniel chapter 7, notice how the beast is described. Okay, verse 4. The first was like a lion, Daniel says. Verse 5. And there before me was a second beast which looked like what? A bear. Verse 6. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like what? A leopard. Okay. And finally, verse 7. After that is after these three beasts appeared, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. All right, so Daniel does not really describe this fourth beast except to say that it was different from all the others, but it does have these 10 horns. If you come back now to Revelation chapter 13, you have once again the beast is imaged with 10 crowns and 10 horns also. And then it also says the beast resembled a leopard, but had feet like that of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. Same animals that are spoken of in Daniel. So, what's trying to be portrayed here? I think he's trying to say to us that this final beast will have all of the characteristics of the previous anti-God empires, but all rolled up into one. It will have a swift-moving nature like the leopard. It will have the power of a bear and the majesty of a lion. Okay? It will be like Greece and Persia and Babylon, all rolled up into one. Swift like Alexander the Great, powerful like Cyrus the Persian, and the majesty of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Think about how boastful those three kings were. Alexander the Great and his rapacious desire. Nebuchadnezzar, who we know was punished because of his great blasphemous claims. Cyrus. If you can see all those things that are rolled up into one, you can see why the end of verse 1 says that the beast has a blasphemous name on each of its heads. This beast will think so much of himself, he will eventually say, as we're going to find out later in the chapter, I am God in human flesh. And we'll see that as we keep moving back and forth between Daniel and Revelation. All right, one more thing I want you to see before we move to the beast's authority. Verse 3 says, One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed, and the whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. Now, this is interesting. It appears as if this beast, this end-time ruler, will actually be fatally wounded at some point. But the wound will be healed, and this will be what leads the world to marvel at him and ultimately to throw their allegiance and even their worship behind him. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to how literally this is to be taken. Will this final leader actually really be killed? Will he really die? And if so, by what power does he raise from the dead? Does Satan have that kind of power? That's an open question here. Or, since Daniel calls him the master of intrigue, will this be a ruse of some sort, where people think that he's dead and fatally wounded, but in fact he's only staging these things in order to look as if he is actually dead and then resurrected? Now, I don't know what the right answer to that question is. I could kind of see it going both ways, so I would just encourage you to keep your mind open in regard to the possibilities of it. But regardless of whether it is real or is orchestrated, it seems quite clear what the intent is behind it. With this man who is eventually going to claim to be God in human flesh, Satan is going to have his own death and resurrection. Do you see that? He's copying what happened to the real Christ, whether it be an illusion or a real thing. So Satan is going to have his own Christ, and this will not be complete without its own version of the death and resurrection. And the illusion will be so powerful, or the reality of it will be so powerful in its effect, this will be the thing that causes those in the world who are skeptical of him to ultimately throw their allegiance and worship behind him. Now, with that in mind, I want you to think about something that Jesus once said when he was speaking of the end times in Matthew chapter 24. Look here at what he says in verse 23. Jesus says, "At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Messiah,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." And he says, see, I've told you about this ahead of time. So Jesus is saying the end-time deceptions are going to be so compelling, so strong, that if it were possible, even God's elect would be deceived. Now, thankfully, the implication is it's not actually possible. God preserves and sustains his true people. But that gives us just the kind of indication of how powerful these illusions or false wonders are going to be. And that, by the way, is why I ultimately decided to not just do a survey in this class, but to do a more thorough presentation of all this. I know the view that I am taking is somewhat different from those historically in Churches of Christ who have done this. For those of you who are taking Doug's class on Thursday, he will have a different view of it than I do. But I think it is kind of important that we at least be aware of the possibility of these things. I have no doubt that I'm not getting all the details right. And if I only knew which details I was getting wrong, I would tell you, and I would clear that up for you. But at the very least, I want these things to be in the back of your mind so that if we should find ourselves in such days, I don't know that we will. I have no particular projection about times and dates and whether it will come upon it in our time or not. But if we should find ourselves in such days, and I am right about how some of this will unfold, I just want it to be in the back of your mind so that you will know to resist if such things were to come upon us. Okay? All right, so we have seen the appearance of the beast and how he comes up out of the sea and out of the abyss. Now that we have beheld his appearance, I want to look at his authority. And you'll notice it says here in verse 4, people worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And if you look back at the end of verse 2, it says there, the dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and his great authority. Now, as we think about this, I want to draw your mind back to something that we looked at just a few weeks ago. I want to draw your mind back to that scene at the beginning of the Gospels where Satan meets Jesus out in the wilderness to test him the same way that he tested Adam and Eve in the garden. And Satan first approaches Jesus as he approaches him in regard to his hunger. Turn these stones into bread, he says. After all, you got the power. It's your right to do whatever you want. But Jesus says, no, man shall not live by bread alone, but by the very words of God. And the temptation here, I think, is not just in regard to hunger. He's trying to get Jesus to use his power for his own selfish purposes rather than to use his power for which the Father has given him the task, right? In the second temptation, Satan takes him to the top of the temple. Now, I don't know what you have in mind when you think about the temple, but you need to think about the temple in Jesus' day. It was a massive complex of buildings. And there was the temple proper, which you see right there in the middle, which is very tall, where the holy place and the most holy place would have been. Okay, big, tall building, one of the taller buildings of the ancient world. And so Satan takes Jesus up there to the pinnacle of that temple, and he says to him, throw yourself off of there, because the scriptures say that the angels won't let your foot strike a stone. Once again, he's tempting Jesus to misuse his power. He's tempting him to do something spectacular to draw a crowd. He's basically tempting him with the same thing that I think he's very much tempting the church with in many places today. Do the spectacular to try to draw a crowd. And Jesus says, no, you do not put the Lord your God to the test. All right, Satan says, I have one more thing to show you. And in a vision, in the flash of a moment, I think one of the texts says, he shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. And he says to Jesus, all of these I will give you if you will just bow down and worship me. And the temptation here is, okay, Jesus, take the easy way out. The kingdom is already going to be his anyways, but he's going to have to go through a lot to obtain it. He's going to have to go through the cross, go through the suffering, all that kind of stuff. So Satan's just saying, listen, I'll give it to you. Just take the easy route. All you got to do is bow down and worship me, and you don't have to pay that heavy price. And we all know that Jesus turns down that offer, but it is one thing that Satan says in the midst of this that I want to draw your attention to, which we looked at a few weeks ago. Here it is in Luke chapter 4 and verse 6. I will give you all of their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. And there's the key line that I want you to see. The kingdoms of this world and their authority and their splendor have been given over to Satan, and he can give it to anyone he wants to. He offered it to the Christ, but Christ turned it down. Well, guess what Satan's going to do in the final days of this age? He is going to offer it one more time, but this time to the Antichrist, to the beast. And he will take it and will make use of it. And that's what you're seeing here in Revelation chapter 13. The dragon is summoning the beast out of the abyss, And he is offering to the beast all of his authority, all of his power, and the beast is going to take it, and he is going to wreak havoc with it. Two things he will primarily do. Verse 6, he will blaspheme God. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. Okay? Now, I was mentioning Daniel earlier. Daniel also speaks to this reality. In Daniel chapter 11, he makes this prediction about this king who is to come. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. There's the blasphemy. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but he will exalt himself above them all. Here's another from Daniel chapter 8 and verse 24. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. And when they feel secure, they being the Jews, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. And we'll end with this one from Daniel 7:24. The 10 horns, we keep seeing that pop up, right? The 10 horns are the 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. And after them another king will arise, different from all the earlier ones, and he will subdue the 3 kings, and he will speak against the Most High. There's the blasphemy again. And he will oppress his holy people, and he'll try to change the set times and the laws, and the holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. So blasphemy will be one of his primary realities, characteristics. The other one will be the persecution that he brings against God's people, and that's where we'll have to pick it up next week. Okay? Appreciate y'all's time, and sorry that we had to cut things a little short today.